Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokies fans? We're in the full swing of basketball season with a bye week for football. We're talking all things Hokies hoops. It's episode 391 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. We're recording on Thursday, November 14th, 2024 from our high-tech studio in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com. Check out all of our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions are just $12 a month for loads of content. And as always, if you're a Virginia Tech student, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, and the Tech Sideline podcast is also brought to you by the Robertson and Cox Real Estate Team. List your property with the RNC team, and not only will it be listed on the MLS as usual, it will also be shown to tens of thousands of visitors to techsideline.com and Tech Sideline social media. Plus, we'll give you a free one-year subscription to Tech Sideline and a very cool piece of Tech Sideline apparel. Visit rncteam.com and contact them to get started today. All right, we got a three-man crew once again today. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist. Across the way, it's David Cunningham, our managing editor, and of course, our basketball insider. D. Cunningham always on site for Hokies Hoops. Guys, I want to start broad, talk some general thoughts here. Men's basketball off to a 3-0 start, wins over Delaware State, USC Upstate, and Winthrop. Then the women's basketball team sits at 2-1 with wins over UNCW and UNC Asheville. The loss coming on Sunday at Iowa. Looking, bird's eye view, what are your immediate thoughts through three games for both of these teams?
I don't think I've seen anything that has surprised me from either team so far. I think the record each team has is probably the record that we thought they would have. I think, the women's team, they're adjusting to a new style of play that was unlikely to translate well to against an Iowa team who, yes, they changed coaches, but they hired their top assistant, so they did not change systems. In the men's team, you've got the youngest team in the ACC in D1 experience, 0.99 years per Ken Pomeroy. And they're learning a complicated offensive system, and none of them have played together before, so things are a little slow from that regard, as you would have expected. But sure. Yeah, we're not going to uncover new ground on the basketball teams right now, because so far both have been pretty much exactly what we thought they would be.
I think the biggest test for the men so far is tomorrow, Friday night, against Penn State. The women, I think we kind of got a little bit of a glimpse of what this team could be against Iowa. I was impressed with how the Hokies, despite getting down early, fought back, made it a 4-point game at halftime. They made it a 2-point game midway through the third quarter. I mean, the box score would show that it's a 19-point win, but it was a very close game for almost three full quarters. So I was encouraged by that performance against an Iowa team that returned a ton of veterans and had some really, really talented players coming in. I think this Virginia Tech team on the women's side is going to surprise some people this year. Now, there are going to be some bumps in the road for sure, but I think the buildup, the makeup of this team, some really, really talented kids, it's more so just can they find the lineups that work best. On the other side, Mike Young's trying to do the same thing, and I think we're starting to see some guys who have come on strong, played pretty well. Jaden Young, both shot the ball all right last game, especially Shoot. Tyler Johnson's come on strong. The balance at point guard's very, very interesting to watch. But we will know a lot more about the men after Friday's game against Penn State. That, to me, is kind of the first benchmark, kind of like the Iowa game was for the women.
Let's first talk about the men, then we'll get into the women here, because you mentioned that matchup coming up against Penn State. So far what the men have done found itself in a 14-point hole early against USC Upstate. You end up bouncing back, win that game by 19 points. But it's one of those moments where you kind of sit there and scratch your head a little bit, and then just edging out a win against Winthrop, 58-52, the final score. That one was close all the way throughout inside Castle a couple of nights back. It appears that Mike Young's sixth season could prove to be maybe his most headache-inducing, besides arguably the COVID year so far in his tenure in Blacksburg.
Could be this year, could be his first year when it was a brand new system for everybody. He had a 6'5" center and a bunch of freshmen. Or it could be this year. We'll see. I think his first team overachieved from what everybody was expecting. We'll see what happens this year. I think the last game against Winthrop, most people knew that was going to be a challenging game because Winthrop returned a lot of very experienced players who were on their team last year. And
but you rarely see these days at that level.
You rarely see these days. And there was a team, I believe, won 17 games last year. So that was going to be a challenge, and the Hokies answered it. The thing that impressed me the most was Mike Young's absolutely right. They were horrible defensively against USC Upstate. And they knew they had to have a better defensive performance against Winthrop. And I thought against the toughest competition they faced so far, they actually had their best defensive performance. And I thought that was a good sign. Upstate, getting up 16-2 on the Hokies is never ideal, but I think Tech was missing shots early in that game. That was a big issue there. Just they were getting pretty decent looks, they just weren't making them. But USC Upstate took Wake Forest down to the wire last night. Man, they've got this freshman wing named Mr. Dean. That's his name. Virginia Tech has played him better defensively than anybody else. Against Wake last night, 24 points, 10 of 14 from the field. That guy is going to be making some money next year for playing for someone else, most likely. That's just the way it works in college basketball these days. But I'm not displeased by anything I've seen from the Hokies. It's just there's going to be growing pains this year, and you're going to say it for the women's team too. There are going to be points this season. There's going to be a game or two where you're like, wow, they're really making progress. They might be about to turn the corner, and then they come back the next game and lose by 20, and you'll feel like you took a step back, but that's just all part of the process.
I agree. I think the men. I think it's a little surprising, Gio, for some people to watch this team. After the success Mike Young has had here at Virginia Tech, to go, this team is letting a bunch of smaller teams kind of hang around, especially the being down 16-2 early to USC Upstate. I think that was very surprising. But at the same time, this is a team that is playing together for the first time. Talking with Brandon Recksteiner after that USC Upstate game, he mentioned that one of the things Mike Young told the group, act like you've been there before. And Brandon was like, none of us have. Sure, some players, Elijah Poteet, Ben Burnham, some of those guys have played some big minutes. But at the same time, a lot of the guys who are playing key minutes for this team this year have never played big minutes period and have never played together. And so it's going to be a learning curve. And I think the good news is that this should be a program that keeps a lot of these guys around for the next 2-3 years, where they're playing together next year. The only guys who won't be back because they run out of eligibility are Ben Burnham and Elijah Poteet. So you're looking at a potentially starting five next year with Rex Steiner at the point, Jaden Young, Jaden Shute. You got Toby Lawal in there. You even got Tyler Johnson, Ryan Jones Jr., who appears like he's coming back from an injury right now. There's going to be talent. So it's going to take some time. I can tell that fans are a little bit on edge because it's like, oh man, these games are close. It's going to be an uphill climb this year for men's basketball, but I think the future, if Mike Young can kind of hold it together, looks pretty bright.
These numbers are a little bit skewed, especially because we've only played 3 games. Everybody has played, for the most part, lesser quality opponents, but Virginia Tech falls in that category. They're currently 13th in the ACC with 78 points per game. Why do you think it is that they're struggling to score the basketball?
Their shooting's been inconsistent so far. The first game of the season, they came out guns blazing. And then against USC Upstate, they couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. But then once they finally started hitting, they closed really, really strong. I mean, how many points did they end up with against Upstate? 93. Well, remember, like 10 minutes of the game, they only had 2 points, right? So
at the under 16, they had 2 points.
Right. So they started off so slow in that game and still scored 93. I think the Winthrop game, which was the most experienced and the best team they've played by far, was the game where they really struggled offensively. And there's just so many moving parts to Mike Young's offense. What do you do off certain actions and things like that? And these guys aren't used to it. Most of them aren't used to it. And they're all playing together for the first time. Like, you didn't expect everything to be smooth sailing. Mike Young's teams are about cohesiveness. And this team is not cohesive because they've never played together before. I agree with David that there's a certain, you're never going to keep all your players these days, but there's a certain core that's going to be very important to keep intact. And right now, I know that 3 of those guys are Shoot, Tyler Johnson, and Lawal. Other guys will be on that list by the end of the season, but it'll be important to keep that core together and then add to them for next season.
So Tech had 7 points at the under 12 media timeout, 13 at the under 8 in that game, was down 20-13 against USC Upstate.
So in the last 28 minutes of the game, they scored 80 points.
Yes.
See, I mean, look, it's going to be a streaky team. Like, when they're on, they're going to be able to score. But there's going to be moments where you don't feel like things are going very well.
Yeah, I said it after the last game. If Tech plays good defense and rebounds well, and we can talk about offensive rebounding eventually, but if Tech plays good defense and rebounds well, this will be a team that is in a lot of games. Same thing goes for the women's team. If they play good defense and they rebound well, you'll be in games. It's magical how that works, right?
Yeah, right.
If you can control the glass and don't allow offensive boards for the other team, and at the same time you can lock them down, if the offense can come along, and specifically for the men, like Gio, you asked why they're struggling a little bit. I think they're getting a bunch of good looks. It's not like they're taking necessarily terrible shots. I do think there are a couple where it's like, I'm not sure that that's the right shot. Like, I thought like Malijah Poteet pulls up from the top of the key. Not that that is a terrible shot, but also it's like
he did make one in a scrimmage.
He did. It's like, but
maybe a little too early in the shot clock.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like there's probably a better shot somewhere. But I think that's more of a one-off than the norm. Like, I thought Tech did a pretty good job of moving the ball in some of these games and getting good looks, just didn't fall. So what I'm very curious to see is the balance at point guard between Ben Hammond and Brandon Rechsteiner. It seems like Mike Young is it's a push-pull right now, and he's trying to get the best balance, and he doesn't want to keep Rechsteiner on the floor too much. But he knows that Hammond can't be on the floor too much. But Hammond's looked the part, I think, so far. But I think he maybe runs the offense the best right now, but Rechsteiner's the best scoring option. So, and then defensively, what's your best matchup? I don't know. So it's an interesting formula for Mike Young to try to figure out. And I think every lineup presents different pluses and minuses on both ends of the floor. I think the bottom line is that Tech maybe hasn't gone as inside as it probably should. But what I will note is that there have been, in the opponents that they've played, those defenses that they've played have changed up all the time. Like, you look at Delaware State, the opener, it was like Delaware State was playing a different defense every possession. And I think that's hard as an offense to kind of go, okay, we're playing against a 3-2 zone, then we're playing against a 1-2-2, three-quarter court press, and then they're going 1-3-1, and it's just like it makes the game a little choppy if you're Virginia Tech playing offense. So I wouldn't read too much into it, but at the same time, if we go out tomorrow against Penn State and shots don't fall for the Hokies, then it's going to be okay. What's going on? Because there'll be 4 games where Tech's kind of maybe gotten good looks and they haven't really fallen.
Wanted to ask you guys to talk a little bit more about Toby Lawal, freak athlete, leading the team in scoring right now. What does he bring to the table?
He's really athletic. I mean, Mike Young said he's the best athlete he's ever coached. I'm not familiar with his days at Wofford as much, but certainly the best athlete Virginia Tech has had since Mike Young has been here. He brings something to the table that fans have been asking for: more athleticism. You give up a little bit of skill, like there are times when he's got the ball in his hands, and then you're like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? It's either going to be amazing,
good and bad.
Yeah, exactly. You could have a dunk where his head is basically at the top of the rim, and or you could have turnovers where he just throws it into the back court, and you're just like, where's that going, right? But he brings a presence to Virginia Tech that they haven't had in a while. I believe he was it 38th or something last year in offensive rebound rate, and there's a reason right now Virginia Tech is, what's the updated stat for
22nd?
22nd in the country in offensive rebound rate. Mike Young's best team at Virginia Tech was 171st, and now they're 22nd, and that's because of Lawal, and that's because of Tyler Johnson. I mean, Tyler Johnson had 10 rebounds in the first half.
Did you see the stat I put in my story?
Yeah.
He's the first true freshman with 10 rebounds in a game since Kadeem C in 2016.
Yeah, that's crazy. Wow. That just does happen very often, and to do it from the small forward position, and I think he's in the top 100 in an offensive rebound rate this year himself. He's 96. There are 95 players above him, and only 4 or 5 of those players are 6'5" or shorter. So he's punching above his weight. Or punching above his height, I guess is what I should say. But yeah, he's a tank. And now those guys, they're not going to bring the shooting as of right now as some of the past 3s and 4s that Virginia Tech has had. But there's always give and take. The Hokies needed to change. Mike Young knew he needed to change his formula after last year. So there are a couple guys on his team that don't seem like they're fits offensively from what the Hokies normally do. But I'm not sure that's not a good thing. Like Mike Young's a good enough offensive coach where he can conjure up points. But it's like when they made the NCAA tournament and they were actually a really good defensive team was when they had guys who he never would have recruited in the first place. Wabisa Beatty, he never would have recruited. Tyrese Radford, he never would have recruited. But, those guys were the foundation of what was an outstanding defensive team. And I think if you look back to that, there was more balance on those teams. You didn't have as many guys who could shoot it as you've had the last few years, but you had more defensive players. Whereas the past few years, it's only been Couture who you could really rely on to get a defensive stop. So I think this team is more balanced than those past teams as far as the skill sets of its players. It's showing up to a certain extent. It's not going to make a difference in the win-loss column this year because they're so inexperienced. But if you bring the core back next year, I think on the whole, you're a more dangerous lineup because you have players who can do a wider variety of things on the court.
You called the game Monday night?
No.
You did not call them.
No, I called the 2 women's games so far.
Evan called
the game Monday night.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, I was thinking about who, it was you who had the call of Lawal's block.
That was the legendary Evan. Mr. Evan Hughes.
You can imagine seeing that from courtside.
Yeah. You asked Gio about Toby Lawal and what he can do, and it is Lawal, by the way.
Yes,
it's not
Lawal.
It is
Lawal.
I have confirmed that.
There's going to be lots of tweets that say Lawal. Like WOW.
Yeah, which is he, like Chris said, he brings something unique, and I think Mike Young's biggest challenge is figuring out how to include him in an offense that doesn't necessarily fit what Mike Young has always done in the past. He can stretch the floor and shoot a 3, but that's not where he's best. He's best at getting to the rim because he's a high flyer, and it's like nobody's going to stop him. I thought maybe Lawal's best offensive play so far was against Winthrop, where he caught it kind of in the corner, kind of on the wing, and he pump faked, and he got the defender in the air and just drove by him and cocked it back and slammed it. And like, that is an athletic play that few can make. And I think he just provides something very, very, very unique. And it's how does Mike Young continue to embed that into the offense, because there are going to be possessions where probably looks a little clunky because he's not necessarily your typical three-point shooter. And that's where guys like Jaden Young and Jaden Shoot, and I think Brandon Recksteiner can operate very, very well. But I think, wow, on both ends too. We've seen his defense so far. He's long. He's athletic. Like, his wingspan is crazy to the point where, like, I think he's going to be able to guard a lot of guys that maybe not guys that weigh a lot more than him, but guys that are maybe a little bit bigger, just because of how far he can stretch. And we saw him get up for that block in that last game. I mean, that looked like he just was playing like tetherball, like he just came over and slapped it. He is exciting. Like, I don't know when the last time Virginia Tech fans saw a more exciting, like, high-flying guy than him.
Yeah, that's
maybe Duron. It'd be Duron Washington.
And Chris Clark.
That
would
was
be the only other one in the
yeah.
conversation from recent memory. Yeah,
it's the kind of player you only get every 15 years in a program if you're lucky. And so many highlights throughout the season to come. Guys, this freshman class, led by Tyler Johnson and Ben Hammond, in my opinion, might have the best chance to be one of the most productive freshman classes that Mike Young has had. Now, things could have been different if Rodney Rice doesn't get banged up, so on and so forth. But those guys are going to play some significant minutes this season.
Oh, absolutely. And David's right. The point guard situation is interesting because you're talking about two completely different players. If they were the same player, it would be a lot easier to judge. Like, okay, you know exactly what you're getting out of both of them. It's just which one is better, right? Well, the fact of the matter is, like, neither one of them is better. They both do different things. Like, if you're at the end of the game, as we saw the other night, and you want to get a stop, particularly as an own ball defender, Ben Hammond is your man. Like, he is a very scrappy. His steal rate is 5.5%. Last year, that would have ranked 5th in the country. Now that'll fall as the Hokies face better competition and everything like that. But he is very willing to defend. He's got the athleticism to defend, and he's got a toughness about him and a scrappiness about him. That said, you know, if I'm having a 3-point competition, then I'm going to pick Brandon Recksteiner every time over Ben Hammond, right? So they bring just a different skill set to the table. It'll be interesting to see how they use Recksteiner defensively. Like, I think his biggest weakness defensively is he seems to give up the drive a little too much. So you ideally don't want him guarding wings, but if it's one of those wings who's not a good driver and it's just a spot up shooter, maybe you switch it off. Like maybe he's defending a 6'5" 2 guard. Doesn't sound like a great matchup, but if that guy's not a driver, then I think you limit, you know, Recksteiner's weaknesses, and maybe Jaden Young can guard the point guard. You should be able to handle that most times. So it'll be interesting to see that dynamic going forward. But yeah, Hammond's, you know, he didn't really do anything the first game, and he told Mike Young after the game that he was nervous. But you've seen him come on the last couple games, and I think what he's done on the court has been pretty credible.
Yeah, the one freshman you didn't mention is Ryan Jones Jr., who is the top rated. It sounds like, from everything I gather, that he's been dealing with a little bit of an injury. We saw him, I want to say, in the Delaware State game, the opener.
He was on the court for like 2 offensive possessions and scored both times.
He's going to be good, and I think as he...
Love his size.
6'8",
240.
Yeah, as he gets healthy, from my understanding, he's going to kind of work his way a little bit into the rotation. Tyler Johnson, I think he's a name. If you're a Virginia Tech basketball fan, you need to know, because this kid's the future of the program right here. Like, he is a guy who honestly could probably start for the Hokies right now.
He's already playing starters minutes, really, 22 minutes a game.
Yeah, he is fun, and he's very, very good on the defensive end, and he is an excellent rebounder. I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but from pure athleticism, like he's punching above his weight. Reminds me of what Tyrese Bradford used to do, right? A guy who just has a nose for it, has a knack for it. Like, he goes and grabs rebounds. He had 6 offensive boards last game. Very interested to see what he does against better competition, but I think the Hokies have a really good freshman class, and kind of reminds me a little bit of the freshman class Mike Young had his first year. Hunter Couture, Naheem Aline. That was kind of an impact class for him. Needed to be. Jalen Cohn and John Ojiak were also in that class. Funny enough, 3 of those guys ended up transferring over the course of their career, as one does in the transfer portal era.
One won a national championship at UConn.
Naheem Aline did win a national title at UConn. But yeah, I mean, I think this can be a very, very impactful class. And if those guys, if Jones, if Hammond, if Johnson, if those guys stick around and just kind of like buy into the system, this is going to be a really good base for Mike Young. And a lot of the team is young anyway. You're looking at a guy in Jaden Young, who's a sophomore. Brandon Recksteiner is a sophomore. Jaden Shute is still pretty young, a redshirt sophomore. Lawal still has another year of eligibility after this. And that's where I get really excited, Gio, because it's like everything might not necessarily come together this year for this team, and there are going to be some growing pains, and there are going to be some tough losses in there, and losses where you're probably scratching your head going, man, this Virginia Tech team is not very good. But if Mike Young can continue to kind of turn things and get things going, and these guys can see more minutes and see more reps. We're talking about a guy like Tyler Johnson. He's playing like 22 minutes a game. He's only played in 3 college games. So it's going to come with time. You can't beat experience. And I think as those guys gain more minutes and gain more reps, the product will start to look a little bit better.
You have to make sure at the end of this season you're in a better place with men's basketball NIL.
Yeah.
Because I can guarantee you that people will try to steal Tyler Johnson in the offseason. And
Toby Lawal.
Probably so. Yeah, that's just the way it is. You want to be able to retain those guys and also add a couple of key pieces around them. Like we'll see how it goes with Recksteiner and Hammond. Maybe Mike Young decides, I need a really good point guard, proven point guard next year to pair with all these other guys, or maybe he won't. I don't know. But you've got to make sure. Like one of the reasons the roster turned over so much was because of NIL, or lack thereof in the case of Virginia Tech men's basketball. So they got to make sure that's in a better position by the spring, because I do like the core group, like David said, and I think it's capable of. I think they're going to struggle this year. I think they'll go around 500 this year, thereabouts, give or take a game.
Yeah.
But I think they've got a good future if you can keep the core intact. But you've got to be able to do that. You've got to understand that that's a decent investment right there. Certain players on this men's basketball team, and if you want to be successful long term, that's what you got to do.
And Mike Young's recruited well too. I should add that. Like these guys, this freshman class, Gio, back to your original question. Like these guys are very, very talented. And the 2 guys Tech just signed yesterday: Sincere Jones, a kid from Churchland, I believe, and Christian Gerdak, a center. I mean, he's a top 100, top 75 kid. Like there's good talent coming into the program, but the challenge is going to be keeping it together. If you can do that, this team will be successful in years to come. But the problem is, just like we saw last year, there are more lucrative offers elsewhere.
Yeah, imagine if Padula had stayed. And
he just dropped 27 last night.
Yeah, exactly. And we never know what official numbers are and everything like that. But the number that got reported, I think it was on Trilly Donovan, that he was going to make it at Ole Miss was basically about 40% of what I believe Virginia Tech's entire budget is this year for men's basketball. Right?
Yeah.
If you could have matched that, I mean, just imagine Padula on this team.
Could have looked a little different.
That's going to be worth. That would be worth. How many games would that be worth?
Probably 3 or 4 wins.
Right. Exactly. But Virginia Tech's priorities were
we're a 5-5 football team.
We're paying wide receivers in an offense that was not going to have a good passing game, most likely. Anyway, I don't want to get into it.
It's a basketball podcast. We all know. My biggest thing, guys, and forgive me if you don't want to dive into this conversation. I want to make it abundantly clear that at least I, sitting here, don't know anything. I just hope that Mike Young's willing to invest in this class because I could totally see a situation like he's been doing this for a long time, guys, and he's had a lot of success, and he went and got his dream job at his dream school. He won an ACC championship here. You just saw Tony Bennett call it quits 2 weeks before the season ended. You've seen all these older legendary head coaches saying, I don't want anything to do with this next era. Who's to say Mike Young isn't next in the pecking order?
You're exactly right. And it could be. It could happen. Like, I'm not making predictions or anything, but if he came out after the season and did it after this season and just cited some of those same reasons, it wouldn't surprise me. I don't want him to leave in the current situation at Virginia Tech. I think that would be exceedingly bad for the basketball program because I think he's a guy who can get more with less.
Yep.
And when you're near the bottom in the ACC and NIL for men's basketball, that's important. If you go out there and hire somebody who can't get more with less and give him the same NIL budget, then your results are going to be really bad. So what I'm hoping is that they show enough this season where he's like, I've got a good core. If I can just get a slight bump in NIL and retain these guys and maybe add one key piece, come back, make a run at it next year with guys a lot more experience within the system and things like that. But yeah, you never know what's going to happen in college basketball these days. And obviously he is a coach that relies on experience with his system, and it's harder to build up that experience in this day and age, and unless you've got a fairly healthy NIL budget.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking you mentioned Tony Bennett. You talk about Mike Young. You look at other coaches. There are few that, like Coach K, that were able to do what he did with so many guys that were young and inexperienced, right? The freshmen coming in, he and Calipari did it well. But a lot of these guys that had success, and I just mean making the NCAA tournament on pretty consistent basis. Tony Bennett is a guy, Mike Bray's a guy, they did it with experience, right? They kept their guys around, and that is the biggest challenge. And like Chris said, if Mike Young, if I got a tweet notification or I got an email or I got a text, Mike Young's retiring today, I'd be like, really? In the middle of the season? It wouldn't be he's retiring. You know what I mean?
You wouldn't be shocked.
I would no. I'd be surprised that it's happening.
Sure.
Yes, the timing. But I think the tough part is that this landscape in college basketball, college athletics period, but specifically basketball, is so crazy, so all over the place, and anything can kind of happen. And you're seeing young guys get out of the industry, and you're seeing older veteran coaches that have been here for a while. And to me, Mike Young, this seems like what Mike Young just wants to keep doing. He's enjoying himself. We'll see if he's still enjoying himself if this team season continues to give him some migraines, like it might. But Gio, I think the positive thing is, like I said earlier, like I wouldn't write this team off. I wouldn't say that this team is not. I don't expect this team to make the NCAA tournament, obviously, but I don't think this is going to be the worst team you've ever seen. There are going to be some.
This isn't going to be like a Ricky Stokes or James Johnson team.
Yeah,
I mean, no.
I hope they prove us wrong and finish fourth in the ACC.
That would be amazing.
That would be nice.
I just think there are obviously going to be some tough games, and Virginia Tech's schedule doesn't help. Like, it opens ACC play at home against Pitt, an NCAA tournament team from last year. Then you go to Duke on New Year's Eve.
Yeah. Luckily, the students won't be there.
The issue with the ACC schedule is so many of the most winnable games are on the road.
Yeah.
So like both Cal programs.
Yeah.
Virginia Tech could certainly beat both of them, but they're both on the road, and they're both in the same week. So you're spending a whole week in California, right? I think Georgia Tech's a team, I believe, that's got a bad loss this year, or do they not?
Florida.
Yeah, North Florida.
Yeah.
I think that's on the road.
Yeah.
Boston College got hammered by VCU. I mean, got crushed by like 25. That's on the road.
And we know those teams.
I'd rather right, exactly.
VC curse.
I'd rather play at UNC, at Duke, at everybody at the top.
Yeah. At Syracuse.
Take my guarantee. Actually, I think, I don't know, man. Syracuse, who they lose to almost lose to the other day. Colgate.
Don't forget about Lemoyne before that.
Right, so they're not playing great, and I think Tech does get Syracuse at home. But I'd love to play those games that are, I don't want to say guaranteed losses, but almost guaranteed losses. Just play them on the road, get it out of the way, get your winnable games at home. Unfortunately, that's not how the schedule falls this year.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. There are going to be a lot of close games, and that's what I'm going to continue to watch is Virginia Tech's defense, because again, shots are going to have to fall for the Hokies to win games. That's basketball, but this I think can be a pretty decent defensive team for Virginia Tech, especially as guys come along, right? As Mike Young kind of figures out what his rotation is looking like. Where does Ben Burnham get involved in this, right? I think Mike Young is still trying to piece stuff together, but he likes what he sees in some areas, doesn't like what he sees in others. He's still figuring it out, and I think this can be a pretty good defensive team. I think this can be a really good rebounding team. It's just, can the offense come along? But I if this team wins 17-ish game, you go 17-15, I think that would be maybe sneak into the NIT. I think that'd be a pretty okay season for this group.
Ken Palm's, first of all, they're actually higher in adjusted defense efficiency right now than offensive, which I don't know if it'll stay that way, but that's where it is right now. Ken Palm's is generally fairly accurate. He projects them to go 15-15. Now he's discounting a game because you don't know who they're going to play in that second game of the tournament. So either 15-16 or 16-15, whatever.
Sure.
But he's got them around 500 with an 8-12 record in the ACC. That's how, and I was looking at it, and it's so close. Like I was looking like he does a points projection for each game, and there were like 3 games in a row, and the points projection was 1 point. Right, so I think Tech will be a little bit more competitive than people think, but there are going to be bumps in the road for sure.
Last thing here before we move on and talk about the women's basketball team. David, fill us in a little bit on the opponent coming up Friday night, 7:30 in Baltimore. You can watch it on Peacock. It's Virginia Tech. It's Penn State. And then from there on, things do not get easier. This schedule to end the non-con is kind of ruthless for Virginia Tech. You go to the Fort Myers tip-off. First, you'll play Jacksonville, part of the Fort Myers tip-off, but that'll be in Castle. Weirdly enough, guys, Carter Hill and I are calling that game for Jacksonville radio.
That's funny.
They hit up Zach Mackey, and they were like, we can't travel our broadcaster. Do you have anybody? And he's like, I got Gio and Carter, and we're calling the game for Jacksonville. So that'll be interesting.
You remember the last time Virginia Tech played Jacksonville?
I don't.
What did Will's not here. Will left the room. Will was sitting in here earlier. It was featured in the year of our discontent.
Really? It was
Tech had an ineligible player. Tech ended up forfeiting.
Oh, so Tech officially lost to Jacksonville the last time they played. Mm-hmm. It was Russell Pierre, probably.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
From transfer from NC State.
What year was that?
86.
Wow.
So, Gio, as a history lesson, Virginia Tech's football and men's basketball programs got leveled with probation by the NCAA on the same day.
For what's the reason?
Everything. A lot of things.
I will. What we leave here, we can go in there.
It's required reading.
You can ask Will. Will wrote a whole series about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll have to check this out.
Anyway, yes, Jacksonville, Michigan, Vandy, Michigan, and then and then South Carolina or Xavier in the Fort Myers, and then Vandy, and then Pitt,
and then finally you get a break with North Carolina A&T.
Yeah, and then you've got, but then after that, before Christmas you have St. Joe's, and then after Christmas you've got Duke.
St. Joe's just beat Villanova.
Yeah, well, Villanova's bad.
They are
fair,
but yeah. So Penn State, this is a pretty good Penn State team. Mike Rhodes' second year. He I think he won like 16 or 17 wins last year. Virginia Tech 314 in experience. This Penn State team is much, much better. I wrote it down here somewhere.
79th, I think, is what you told me earlier. 77th.
Yes.
70 something. So yes, a lot better.
This is a team that plays very, 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 very up tempo. And if you watch Mike Rhodes at VCU, you are probably not And you're probably familiar with that.
Right. Well, I mean, Tech should at least have a good scout on them with J.D. Byers, formerly being on his staff.
Correct. And Toby Lawal, who was recruited to play under Rhodes at VCU. And yes, Byers, former assistant. Byers was originally supposed to go to Penn State,
right,
and then came to Blacksburg. Tempo, average possession length for Penn State is 7th in the country. Just understand that. Tempo 17th, about 44th in adjusted offense, 43rd in adjusted defense right now. Pretty balanced team. If you look at their Ken Palm, a lot of green everywhere. They've got 5 double-figure scores so far this year. Best name, one of the best names, Yannick Conan Niederhausen.
Nice.
I think I got that right.
5.
He's Swiss. He's 7 foot. He's their leading scorer right now. He's averaging about 15 a game.
So
7 foot. That's going to be tough.
So Melagio Petit and Pat Wessler got to bring their big boy pants.
Yeah, this is going to be a big game inside. People in the Commonwealth will probably be familiar with Ace Baldwin, former VCU transfer. He was the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year last year, averaged 14, 6, and 3 steals. They've got a couple other guys in Zach Hicks, DeMarco Dunn, former UNC player, Puff Johnson, former UNC player. Yeah. They've got some talent on this roster, pretty good on both ends. Virginia Tech's going to have to bring its A game, and I think this is one of those games where Tech can get Penn State out of rhythm offensively. Tech has to be good in transition defense, and that's something Mike Young talked about this past week. Tech was, I forget the word he used, but he said Tech's defense was basically abysmal in those first 2 games against Delaware State and USC Upstate, especially in transition. If the Hokies can be good in transition defense, which talking to some of the players after the Monday game, that was like all they worked on. That was a huge point of emphasis last week, last couple days between games, just transition defense. This is going to be a game where you have to lock in on transition defense because Penn State's going to get on a run.
Yeah, this game's all about tempo. If Virginia Tech or if Penn State comes out and they're able to get early shots, that's the style of game they're used to playing. They're going to play a lot of possessions. But if Virginia Tech can limit their early opportunities and force them to execute their offense over the course of 30 seconds, that's where Penn State might not be as comfortable because they haven't had to do that yet. So it's an interesting matchup. Obviously, Penn State, they can afford more high-profile transfers with the guys they got from UNC. They have much more experience, so this is probably going to be a loss, but at the same time, neutral site game early in the season, you see upsets all the time.
Virginia Tech and Penn State played just a couple of years ago, so a little bit of a familiar foe, but with the modern era, everything changes here. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. The only place people can watch this, if you're a Virginia Tech fan, is Peacock. So
that's
you
correct.
Can't go to Champs and find it. You can't go to PKs. You have to get Peacock.
You have to get Peacock.
You ready for all the message board users to go, what is Peacock?
What is Peacock? Yeah. Peacock is owned by NBC. I subscribe
to it for
Premier League.
There you go.
And I also like to watch 1990s wrestling on there because they've got WWE Network. But Peacock's not bad. It's valuable. I didn't realize it was on Peacock until I looked at the schedule a few days ago, and I'm like, at least I've got that one.
There you go. There you go. As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, where exceptional customer service comes first. First Bank and Trust Company offers a variety of checkings and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs. That includes free checking, so visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. Let's flip the script, talk about this women's basketball team. Big night last night for Carly Wenzel. The Hokies are 2-1. She had a career-high 25 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists in the win over UNC Asheville. And it just feels like this is a point guard by committee type of team. All 3 of them, Samaya Suffren, Mackenzie Nelson, Carly Wenzel, offer something different, but it's nice to see Carly Wenzel scoring that rock.
Career-high 25 points, career-high 8 rebounds, career-high 3 steals. Great night for her. She had a comment after the game where she's like, this is just my role now. Like, I'm just able to do this. That's not something I was able to do last year. I wasn't asked to do that last year, and I didn't. But I can do that now. And we saw some flashes from Carly Wenzel last year. She had some really, really good games. She also had some games where she turned the ball over a little too much, and that that freshman mentality kind of showed a little bit. She is playing, I think, some of her best basketball, and she's playing with a lot of confidence. It's been really fun to watch her first couple games. Even in that loss to Iowa, I thought she, got Tech going early with some threes. She's playing some really, really good basketball right now. And you mentioned the other 2 point guards. That was my biggest takeaway from last night, Gio. You were on the call, obviously, so you saw it as well. There were a couple lineups out there where Megan Duffy rolled out 3 point guards at the same time. Carly Wenzel, Mackenzie Nelson, Samaya Suffren. I know Mackenzie Nelson didn't necessarily put up the scoring numbers, but she had like 2 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals.
Great defender.
3 drawn charges.
Yep.
And then, Samaya Suffren had a career high 12 points. All 3 of them look extremely comfortable and confident. And I ran the numbers. I don't know if you saw in my article, Gio, Virginia Tech, when those 3 players are on the floor at the same time this year, they've outscored their opponents 54-32.
Wow.
So far.
And that includes the Iowa game where they lost by 20.
Through 3 games. Yeah, that one was that margin was like a 1 or 2 point margin for Tech.
Yeah. Probably when they went on that run towards the end of the second quarter.
I think Megan Duffy's still trying to find out the best lineup, but I think she has discovered that all 3 of those kids play very, very well off one another. You can't beat, I think, the basketball IQ when you have 3 point guards on the floor. They all know what they're supposed to be doing. I think they all get downhill pretty well. Suffren's not as good of a 3-point shooter as Nelson and Wenzel, but they're all pretty good defensively too, especially Suffren and Nelson. So those 3 have been really, really fun to watch. I'm curious, like Saturday, they got Coppin State. Does she continue to kind of experiment with that?
You mentioned the fact of comfortability, especially with some of the inexperience there. Cal Peterson seems to show a lot of that. Calling the game with Mac McCarthy, first of all, is an absolute joy because you just get to sit back and let him cook and his experience. It's actually what I imagine calling a football game with Chris Coleman would be like.
I mean, it's got a lot of McCarthyisms in there.
Yes.
Like I imagine it would be like, let's say Mike Young retired and said, I'm going to be the commentator now with Gio for basketball games. It'd probably be pretty similar to that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely good, fun to hear Mac call games.
I think he also has the slightest twang, just a little bit of like Bill Raftery in him, where sometimes the way he'll say something, he'll be like, look at the newcomer knocking it down. And I'm like, that totally just sounded like Bill Raftery.
There was a point on Monday night where I think Evan asked him, do you think both coaches are happy with their offense right now? And he's like, and at this point, both offenses were struggling. And he's like, no, but I think they're both happy with their defense. Like, yeah, simple answer, but correct answer.
Yeah. Steering it back to this team in the game last night. Mac loves Cal Peterson because he's so impressed with how comfortable she is, especially through traffic inside. When she gets the ball, she doesn't panic, right? And for a freshman, that's such a weapon. He said he believes she's playing well beyond her years at this point. Looks like an experienced veteran out there. What have you seen out of 34 in maroon and orange?
She's been great. I think, if Tech, I think Tech is lucky to have her and let her have an opportunity to kind of learn behind Rose Mishaw. And I think Rose Mishaw has played very, very well so far. She's just gotten in a little too much foul trouble. And that's going to be key this year. Can the Hokies keep Rose Mishaw out of foul trouble? If they can, that's going to be a pretty good front court duo in Mishaw and Peterson. These last 2 games, we've seen Mishaw have to sit a little bit in the first half because of foul trouble, and Peterson's come in, and she's just solid all around, and she's a top 100 freshman. But she just, like you said, looks comfortable. It looks like she knows what she's doing. She's been pretty good defensively. I want to say it was last night where she had a really nice block where somebody went up and she just like the person didn't even release it. She just like pushed it back down. She's playing really well defensively. She looks like she's in the flow of things offensively. She stepped out and hit a 3 last night, a transition 3. She can kind of do it all. I'm curious to see how she continues to grow.
Yeah, Mac's like best line during the game. He was like, so she hits inside, she gets a layup. Then like 2 possessions later, she hits this little very Kitley-esque, because I was even like, Mac, does that look like somebody? The little turnaround. And then she hits this transition 3 where Nelson kicks it back to her top of the key and she knocks it down. And Mac's like, showing you everything. Showing you everything Cal Peterson is. He's a big Cal Peterson.
So how tall is she?
She is, I want to say she's 6'2".
Okay. So could she play the 4 or the 5 theoretically, right? Yeah.
So we've seen her in some lineups as the 4.
Okay. Yeah. So you need one thing they'll have to address going forward is that they need probably one more post player, because like you said, when they get in foul trouble, they're kind of down to their bare bones in there. As far as what you guys have been talking about, I originally said I thought Matilda Eck would be the leading scorer on this team, but I'm really starting to wonder if it's going to end up being Wenzel. She's got the ball in her hands more than anybody else. She can drive. She can make 3-pointers.
Yep.
She's consistent. Fairly consistent.
She's averaging 17.7 points a game.
Right. So, and you have to remember that she's still in the first half of her career. She's a redshirt sophomore. She's got 2 years after this. So I think she has the look of a really, really good player for Tech.
I feel like she has like 6 and 1s through 3 games. Like she's fighting, like she can finish, which is half the battle sometimes. And she's bigger as a guard. So where Suffren will just like lightning quick blow by you, Wenzel will take you all the way to the rack and finish through the contact. Wanted to ask you, Chris mentioned maybe needing another piece on the inside. You've seen minutes with Maya Hazelton. Now you've seen minutes last night for the first time this season with Ramiah White and no Maya Hazelton. Do one of those offer something inside? Are they going to play significant minutes come ACC play? And if so, which one is it? Is it still a feeling out process? Is that why you saw White and not Hazelton, and before you saw Hazelton and not White?
I think they're still trying to figure it out. But what I will say, I asked Duffy about it after the game last night. We saw Ramiah White for the first time. That was her debut. And Chris, you will appreciate this. Duffy said that Ramiah White's somebody who's worked really, really hard and done a really great job in practice. The last week or so. She didn't play in the Iowa game, but she worked really, really well, really hard, and deserved an opportunity to play leading up to that game, and has done so much, putting in the extra work in multiple areas, that she deserved an opportunity, earned an opportunity to play in the game tonight. And Duffy was happy to give her her debut, and she played 11 minutes last night and had 4 rebounds. I don't know if White or Hazelton will be in that rotation. I think it's still kind of too early to tell. And I think honestly, Tech would probably just like to keep Michelle out of foul trouble if possible, to keep her on the floor, because I think she has been so consistent already, except she hasn't been on the floor as much. But yeah, I think you'd appreciate that. So a coach giving the player an opportunity because they've earned it. Again, they've showed it in practice.
Absolutely. And sometimes, especially early in a tenure, you're going to see that. Like some of these in-game decisions could come down to, wow, you really stepped your game up in practice, and we're building the culture here. So I'm going to show everybody else that you can get playing time by working harder in practice. Or conversely, if somebody goes into a little rut in practice and you're not getting what you need out of them, they lose minutes, and you point to them as an example of here's what happens if you're not going all out in practice every day. And those things are generally more typical early in a coach's tenure when they're trying to impose their personality and their style and their culture.
Set the foundation.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot of good. As Andy said, let's pick nits a little bit here. 19 turnovers last night for Virginia Tech, but the Hokies shot nearly 60% from the floor. 2 of 7 from beyond the arc. Didn't really have to shoot the 3. That was very apparent, especially with the opponent. Had their way on the inside for the most part. Does it worry you at all, though, David? 1, the turnovers, and then 2, the fact that so far it's only 3 games, but the 3-point shot is not really falling. Matilda Eck struggling to knock some of the open ones down. We haven't seen a lot out of Karis Baker from beyond the arc, who shot 38% last season in her freshman campaign. Tech shooting 31% from 3. That's 13th in the ACC. It's only 3 games. Does it worry you, though, at all that maybe that element isn't as strong as you thought it could be and they're not taking care of the ball?
I think it all comes back to, it feels like Tech is struggling to get into a flow of the offense at times, and I think that hurts. I think against Iowa, the Hawkeyes did a really, really, really good job defending Matilda Eck. I mean, Jan Jensen, the Iowa head coach, came out and said, yeah, our number 1 priority was stopping Matilda Eck. And they did.
They did.
She had 1 basket on 6 attempts. Really never let her. I mean, it's kind of like somebody was glued to her the entire game, never let her do anything. And you're going to see people do that sometimes this year, I think. That's in some ways a blueprint, in my opinion, of how to slow down, take one of Tech's best players out of the game. Tech has to figure out how to counteract that. I think of how Mike Young, people always knew they would key in on Hunter Couture. Mike Young came up with ways to still get him open, and you have to be able to do that. And that comes down, I think, to coaching a little bit. But at the same time, Gio, first 6 possessions of the game last night, Hokies had 5 turnovers. You got to clean it up. And Mackenzie Nelson came in, settled things down. Samaya Suffren came in and settled things down. And I think that's something where you might see that point guard trio a little bit more, because it just seems to me like those 3 players, when they're on the floor, they look the most comfortable and confident together, and they're not turning it over. They're not committing a mistake. I think the 3-point shot, it might come with time, but the tough part is the best 3-point shooter on this team, I think, is Matilda Ack. She's not really getting clean, open looks because teams are keying in on her. You have to find a way to get dribble penetration, kick it out to her where she's open. So I think it will come with time. I think Tech is still unlocking stuff. I think, Karis Baker's had a couple I just think haven't fallen. I think Tech's gotten some good looks in general that really, should make, haven't gotten down. It is a little bit worrying. I think the turnovers is the biggest thing. The Hokies need to clean it up. Too many times where I think like Carly Wenzel had one last night where she just kind of like threw it up the floor, and the defender kind of intercepted it. It's like there are little tiny moments I'm sure they'll come back and watch during film where you've played 3 games and you've had some good, some bad. Clean up the bad, and a lot of the bad is turnovers.
A couple more maybe better, I guess, competition is the better way to put it. Coppin State coming up on Saturday, but then you get Rutgers inside Castle Coliseum, a team that Virginia Tech went on the road and beat last year. You get Elon, and then they go down to Fort Myers as well Thanksgiving weekend. David, you said that you think this team can surprise some people. So the last thing on the women's side of things, what do you think the potential is of this team now that you've seen them play 3 games?
I think we could be sitting and talking about a team that's on the bubble come NCAA tournament time. Now things are going to have to mesh the right way. And I think it starts in the front court. Rose Mishaw, again, has to stay out of foul trouble. I think Cale Peterson is a great compliment, but Rose Mishaw is the second most experienced player on the team alongside Matilda Eck, and you need her on the floor. Tech looks really, really good, I think, when she's in there. She's playing well defensively. She looks so confident. I don't know, I've used that word a bunch, but Rose Mishaw, it looks like she's just having so much fun out there. And when she was on the floor against Iowa, she played 19 minutes and had 14 points, right? If you can keep her on the floor, I think that just raises Tech's ceiling. I think this could be, again, a team that is kind of knocking on the door for the tournament. Going to have to be really, really good defensively. I was impressed how Tech has defended the first couple games. Tech's defense got it back into the game against Iowa. I mean, Hokies held Iowa to 8 points in the second quarter. Did a really, really good job of making some in-game adjustments. Hannah Stolke kind of had her way early, and then they were fronting her and then bringing the backside help. In-game adjustments defensively are going to be important, but if this team can defend pretty well, they're going to be in a lot of games. Gio, I expect them to be playing in that title game of the Fort Myers tip-off, that championship game, maybe against Michigan. And that'll be an interesting battle, but I would not shock me at all if Tech wins it. The tough part, again, like we talked about with the men, is the Hokies have such a tough ACC schedule. 3 of their first 4 games are on the road. I think the one home game they have is Florida State. And they've got Duke and Miami on the road, a Georgia Tech team that's pretty good in there. It's just a really, really tough basketball conference. And when you have so many really, really, really tough league games, you can't really afford many slip-ups. So we've got a lot of time before they get to the ACC, SEC Challenge to play Georgia. Still a lot of basketball to be played, but I've been encouraged by what I've seen because I think the Youngtown is pretty good. the veterans. I think everything's kind of shaking it out. But I mean, if you've got somebody like Carly Wenzel who's stepping up, and I agree might lead this team in scoring this year at the rate she's able to find her shot, I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing, and I think this team could maybe overachieve a little bit than maybe what people expected.
Well, there's no doubt there's still a lot to be excited about, whether you're watching the growth of both the men's and women's team or maybe where this women's team can surprise some people. I think there's a lot to be on the lookout for this basketball season. Before we wrap things up, want to allow Nick the opportunity to chime in, Chris the opportunity to chime in if you guys would like. Big one coming up for Virginia Tech Wrestling. They host number 8 Missouri inside Castle Coliseum this Friday, and then next Friday they head to the Moss Arts Center. They got number 20 Rutgers in town. So 2 matches coming up against top 25 opponents, and Tony Roby and crew have an exciting opportunity in front of them, guys.
Got some momentum. Just signed the number 4 recruiting class in the country. Isn't that what you sent us,
Yes.
Nick? And you got a chance to have a top 10 win at home, and a lot of big name wrestlers on this team. I mean, not that there aren't in other years for Virginia Tech. Obviously, there are, but got to have a chance to have a big home win. That would fire up the wrestling fan base for sure to be able to see that win.
Yeah, absolutely. They also go on the road December 19th, I want to say, take on number 4 Oklahoma State for a duel.
Is your head on the screen right now?
Yeah, you can look right up.
What's up, Nick?
But yeah, absolutely. So this is a schedule that's brutal, but this is a team that's ranked number 5 in the country with returning national champion and just a lot of pieces. They got brought in some incredible transfers. This is a team that can make some noise, and you throw in a 4th-ranked recruiting class in the country. I know it's not Penn State, but you can see Roby is building to his ultimate goal of bringing a championship back to Blacksburg.
Thank you from the floating mustache. Well, guys, I think that wraps up episode 391 of the Tech Sideline podcast. What's coming up editorial-wise this week?
It's an open week for football, so
Yeah, it is. Andy Bitter's out of town, but he's left us a special treat. Old school Virginia Tech fans will remember Jason in Arlington, the Tech Talk Live caller, or as it used to be called, Hokie Hotline back in the day. That he had a little call one time that fired up Frank Beamer and the whole fan base for quite a while, and it's one of the I want to say famous but low key famous moments in Tech football history.
You're out of whack.
You're out of whack. And yeah, he's Andy Bitter met Jason from Arlington and interviewed him, and I'll be posting it on the site here shortly. So by the time you see this video, it will be on the site. But that'll be a fun look back. And then I'll have my normal Friday Q&A tomorrow. Brandon Patterson has a Clemson review that I'll be posting today. So it's a bye week, but still got plenty of things to write about.
yeah. Andy is, I believe he texted that he just landed in Madison, Wisconsin this morning. He's going to watch his alma mater, Wisconsin, play Oregon this weekend, which hopefully for him is a really good game. I'm not sure it will be.
They've been up a little bit compared to how the season started.
Yeah,
So we'll see.
well, I believe Oregon's number 1 team in the country. So
Yes, I'm talking about Wisconsin.
Yeah.
They've been up a little bit.
I will be in Baltimore tomorrow night for the men's game. I'll be back. I'm sad I have to miss wrestling and women's soccer here in Blacksburg because women's soccer has an NCAA tournament game against Tennessee. But then I'll be back for women's basketball on Saturday. They got Coppin State. Busy week next week. Rutgers Tuesday. Jacksonville Wednesday. Next Saturday, the women have Elon at home. Same day same day football has Duke on the road. So, and then I'm off to Florida. So,
Pack your swim trunks.
yeah, I didn't even think about that, but yeah, I gotta look and see if the hotel has a pool.
There you go.
This is the time of year where it's good to be David Cunningham. It's it's cold and rainy in Blacksburg. He's already planning his Fort Myers trip. Which beach am I going to go to this day?
This year, no Bahamas this year. No Bahamas. Next year, back to the Bahamas.
Battle for Atlantis. TSL trip to Battle for Atlantis next year, maybe?
Ooh. I still want the Bahamas Bowl.
There you go.
Football, even though it's not affiliated with the ACC. Sounds better than the Fenway Bowl.
I know. I was going to say, I want to go to the Fenway Bowl just to see Fenway Park.
It's just going to be so cold, Gio.
If you're going to play in a pointless bowl game, at least do it in warm weather.
That's a tremendous point, and make a nice vacation out of it. All right. Well, we will talk to you guys, Nick. When are we talking to everybody again? Next week.
Monday.
Next week sometime.
Football podcast.
Talk Duke football.
Because there's not going to be a football game to review.
Right.
So I guess we'll probably do the preview on Thursday.
Yeah. So we'll probably talk to you then. Are you doing Friday thoughts this week? All right. Chris will have Friday thoughts. You'll have plenty of different video and editorial content to check out. So for Nick Brown, for David Cunningham, for Chris Coleman, I'm Giovanni Heaters saying so long. We'll talk to you next week.